Well, thank you very much. It is time now to start our last panel. And I will call the moderator, Uri Pasovsky, senior writer and columnist for Calcalist, Israel's leading financial daily, and one of the best experts on innovation. Thank you very much to join me, Uri. You will have a lot of very, very interesting people on your panel. And so you will have the very, very difficult task to make it quick. And just like to keep the time, as all you know, we will have at 7:30 a very special and historic moment because Henry Kissinger will receive an award from the IDC and is going to deliver his legacy speech to Israel. So if you can just like make it before 7:15, so I guess that everyone wants to join for the Henry Kissinger's event. Thank you very much, and welcome to all the panelists. Thank you very much.
Good evening. So we have, as Barry said, a very distinguished and accomplished panel that represents sort of the entire food chain of the medtech industry, from startup to multinationals and investors. And our goal for this evening is to get a broad sense of where the field is headed, both in terms of the technology and the industry, and also how Israel fits in this future. So I'd like to call Mrs. Galit Zuckerman, CEO of Medasense, Biometrics. Dr. Benny Zeevi, Managing General Partner of Tel Aviv Venture Partners. Mr. Yoav Tzruya, Partner at JVP. Mr. Guido Pardo Roques, President and CEO of Philips Israel. And Professor Peter Fitzgerald, Director of the Center for Cardiovascular Technology at Stanford, and also a Managing Partner at Triventures, based both in the Valley and Israel. So, Peter, as someone who's based both in the Valley and Israel, where you visit often, I was hoping maybe you could give us a brief overview of what the main trends dominating the field in the coming years as you see them.
Sure, Uri. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you spend some time at the end of the day here, and I appreciate the organizers for inviting me. I have a smart partner back there, Michal gave us, so she can even out the boys and the girls, Valerie, since I think that was a request that we had some time ago. So if you need to replace me anytime, you just raise your hand. I think that we're going to see a big change, and I think we heard a little bit about it from Moshe and Iris. We're going to see the Ohmic Revolution. If you don't know what the Ohmic Revolution is, it starts with genes, it goes to proteins that get manifested by RNA, and then ultimately we have metabolomics. Those are all the trillions of molecules and organisms that are on your skin and on your gut, and we're going to modify those over the years. It's going to start out as diagnostics, so we can separate that half of the room from that half of the room that, say, have a genetic predisposition for cardiac disease. And then we're going to move into another type of technology, and that's going to be what we've been talking about, the analytic revolution, so that we can triage patients, not just to the hospital, but to the parts of the hospital, ICU, step-down units. We're going to see images be done in a much faster, more complete way than a radiologist pushing a button. Now, we're not going to replace the radiologist, but we're going to augment, for sure, their care. And then cybersecurity is going to be one of the biggest epics in healthcare, and we're going to draft those algorithms from what's out in the consumer industry today. Once you're decided to be in the hospital, you're going to see robotics have an exponential movement into the hospital. And then you're going to see, as Iris just talked about, retail healthcare. Hospitals will return to ICUs. We will get our care at CVS, super pharmas, and there'll be a whole host of technologies that support that. But I think those are the four issues that I see being the dominant in the next 5 years.
5 years. Not such a distant future. So Guido, so you represent, a large multinational contract to, a small agile startup. So where does Philips see the market going in terms of needs and, its ability to answer them?
Yes, I will be glad to compliment. I have to say, by the way, Tiva and the General Manager of Healthcare Ministry already covered a lot about it. But let's remember, I will just bring one trend. We saw Israel with 7.8%. But we also know that the United States were close to 17%, and the OECD, there are a lot of countries around 14%. Somebody already projected that if we continue the same trajectory with aging population and the rise of chronic disease, we will arrive to bankruptcy, 30% of spending. And there will be two situations. Or we stop giving care to persons that are more than 80 years old. Can you believe such a word? Or we found new ways of doing things. One of these ways is actually, for example, and now I do it very short, to move out of the hospital-based critical care, but shift to what was indicated before, healthy lifestyle, preventative medicine, just in case, diagnosis, treatment, and then home care. We must shift. Now, a company like Philips is very well positioned, in my eyes, because 50% of our income is from traditional fields. Okay, if you are in Israel, but also in the Western world, if you have an heart attack and more than 60 years old, 50 and more percent that they will be treated by Philips equipment. So we know the healthcare space, but we know also the consumer space. And I believe maybe it was not mentioned enough, in the future, people, the population, would like to engage and take ownership on our healthcare. And the digital revolution that was mentioned before will contribute to our ability to take control. And this is where Philips sees that consumerization of healthcare, where everybody is active on that. As was also mentioned, I don't want to meet a doctor, I want an answer. I want to integrate all this information from the cloud and give him something. Philips can be there, will be there, and also in the traditional treatment and so on.
All right, so we got some, very high altitude answers, I think, and I was hoping, Galit, maybe you could give us a more, so your company works on personalized, I think it could be categorized as present in both personalized medicine and digital health. So I think it could be a nice example of what we're talking about when we talk about these developments.
So actually, talking about the future is the present for us. We're developing the thing that as users, as patients, we will see in the coming future. Specifically about Medasense, we came with objectiveness, giving an objective assessment of pain. We have developed a technology that gives this information, objective information about pain, so that physician and care provider can personalize the pain treatment, and that reduce suffering from one end, and on the other end, reduce the side effects and shorten the recovery time. So with the context of giving this personalized information, we give this tool for the physician. This is one element. The other element that now our solutions are in the hospitals. Currently, we are in pre-commercialization, after validation, now starting the selling. Until now, we had like a bedside monitor, but we see all the trends, and we've seen it in the company through the last year, going to bring solution for the home care, not only to the hospital setting, but to all of us, all the 30% of people who suffer from chronic pain who are at home. And then in the company, we adjust to this, what we call the digital health. So our finger probe that is now connected to bedside monitor in our R&D, in our development now is being moving to be wireless. All the information that was just presented in a monitor, now we're working to put it in the cloud so it will be accessible to everyone and in every place. So actually, these are things that we and other companies like that, we've developed the car technology, and now we adjust to give it as smooth as possible, as easy as possible, and accessible as possible to the user at the end.
Ben is someone who, you're an investor now, for many years you've been a practicing doctor. I was wondering if you could say a little about how you see sort of the patient or customer, maybe that's the same thing going forward. You know, how does it feel to be, how would it feel to be, you know, a patient in a consumer-oriented medical field? Do I have a fever and check myself?
I think one of the biggest revolution that is coming up is actually the digital health, but I would say let's look first what are the challenges of the healthcare system. So one is empowered consumer, and we spoke, and Uri spoke, and everyone here in the panel before me spoke about it, but the other thing is cost. And 80% of the cost is actually less than 20% of the population. That's the aging population with the chronic disease. So the question is how we move the needle. How we move the needle. We have to start to treat consumer before they get ill. That's where the value is to the healthcare system. That's on one hand. The other hand is that we have to find solution for those chronic patients out of the hospital, monitoring at home, and those all digital technology will help us take it out of the hospital, have better monitoring before they deteriorate and come back to the hospital where the cost is really. So those are the real solutions that the healthcare system needs. It's a combination of digital consumer devices, but on the other hand, adjust them to the elderly population, chronic patient, that's one. The other thing is the way we consume. The biggest revolution in digital health is how we consume and get services from the healthcare system. But in contrast to any other consumer product, what is different, we still need the collaboration and trust between the service provider, whoever physician, and the consumer, the patient. That's something that doesn't exist in other services or product or consumer, so we have to keep that in mind. The third revolution is, it's a cultural behavioral revolution. It already happened in the millennium baby boomer. It didn't happen in the healthcare system yet. Healthcare system is very slow in adopting new technologies, very conservative. They'll have to move, either they will be out, they lose the train or the plane or whatever. And those that are going to help them or make them do it is on one side is the consumer, and on the other side, who is going to help them are the giant in the technology. Google, Facebook, Apple, those are entering in a big way the healthcare system, really. Google, most of the companies are doing the digital technologies, but Google is entering into the hardcore of the healthcare, developing all kind of measurement devices, looking at the baseline study, what causes disease, and etc. So those are going to help the traditional healthcare provider entering and merging those technologies.
So, you know, one thing connecting many of these points is, I guess, the internet or some sort of communication technology, whether it's Google or, you know, our sensors transmitting our data wirelessly, which naturally brings up the question of security, right? And I guess, you know, it's actually two things. A, can someone, you know, access my private medical information? But B, for those of us who've seen Homeland, without spoiling too much, you know, can anyone mess with my pacer from afar? So, Yoav, could you talk a little about those challenges?
Sure, I'd love to answer that. But before that, maybe I'll relate to Benny's point about the innovation cycle, sort of in healthcare. And I think that you know, the way we look at it, and we're a newcomer to the space, but really, if you look at the you know, the cycle of innovation in healthcare today, when you have the bleeding edge kind of innovation that is powered by universities and the large pharma companies and so forth, but to innovate at that bleeding edge becomes more costly with time, right? So it costs more to develop new drugs. Actually, there's a lot of competition on limited budgets from the HMOs, from government and so forth. So this is not a place where if I had to place my chips on a company to innovate, then I would not necessarily put them on the most kind of bleeding edge of pharmaceuticals. On the other hand, what we have is a very fat tail, okay, which is actually becoming fatter and fatter because a lot of the population is not actually receiving bleeding edge kind of treatment, right? And are not made available or not exposed to these opportunities. So we have a very fat tail, which is supported by the commoditization of standard or what is standard today, medical devices and procedures and so forth. The challenge there is that we're missing a lot of caregivers, right? We have the right skills to operate all those devices, to administer all those treatments and so forth. But this is a huge opportunity, especially in markets. We're all discussing, and I think Iris touched on that, and we're all looking westwards, right? We're all looking into the US as the largest target markets, but actually the biggest opportunity from a dollar perspective in medical and healthcare is not looking west, it's looking east, right? And it's looking south, right? So we need to look at Latin America, we need to look at Africa, China, India, and so forth, developing countries in terms of where is the real opportunity in healthcare, and this is something that gets us excited. Not necessarily to innovate and take 20 years to come up with the next, proven drug, but rather to move in a much quicker cycle based on existing infrastructure and proven medical devices and so forth, and automate all of that. Now, in order to automate, you need exactly that communication capability and to tie everything together in an automated fashion, and this is where cyber becomes more and more important. And you touched on that pacemaker kind of hack that was demonstrated on TV, but there were real hacks, right? A drug infusion equipment has been hacked, and hackers were able to change the amount of drug administered to patients in the hospitals, right? But it doesn't stop there, because if we look at the full cycle of healthcare, then we're seeing hacks not just on medical devices, but also in pharmaceutical companies. So, for example, changing the amount of active ingredient in a certain drug while on the production line is a major issue today. And we're seeing all the major pharma companies actually starting to wake up to that call. By the way, unlike the energy sector, which is highly regulated in that respect, and government officials are putting standards to account for such cyber incident, in pharmaceuticals, there is no such standards, right? It's very easy, and we have a couple of companies that actually demonstrate that whenever we come and meet new pharma companies, to hack into the production line and to change the active ingredients material. And it's amazing how easy it is. And if you look at the information side of that, $6.2 billion in damages to HMOs in last year. The average cost of a hack is reaching $2.5 or $3 million, right? 80% of HMOs, 79% actually of HMOs have admitted of being hacked over the last year, right? We're seeing cyber insurance for medical vendors and HMOs going up. 50% have taken up cyber insurance. By the way, don't quote me on this. This is completely useless, right? Because the insurers, they have no way to actually account or measure the effectiveness of your cybersecurity measures. So we're seeing a huge industry, which is fundamental in the ability to maintain lives, right? And much more sensitive than, let's say, a nuclear factory being blown up by ISIS or something like that. It's much easier to hack into Teva's production line and change the active ingredients. Not Teva, maybe someone else, but it's much easier than to hack into a nuclear power plant. And this is where we see huge opportunity, and we're actively investing in that space.
Yoav, let me kind of comment on that a little bit, because I want to make it a little bit more specific, because changing the chemical composition of a drug, or actually, stopping a pacemaker, you can do that today. That's a tiny business market. Where the big business market is, 180 million medical records were stolen last year in the United States. 3 issues. I got your social security number. I can file tax returns for the next 2 years before I'm caught. You get your medical record number. I can file Medicaid or Medicare for the next 2 years before I'm caught. I have your drug record. I sell that on the black market. That's far more prolific, far more of a need in changing chemicals. That's a threat, and that's terrible, and it's a problem, but it doesn't scale like that one does. So I think just to make sure we have the levels of scare that can happen when you attack it.
Definitely.
Remember, we're all bringing iPods, iPhones, and they interact with the iVacs, and that gets into the EMR. And those are completely unprotected. And the more those nodes come in, that's where the vulnerability is.
Yeah, I will not quote the name of the company, but there is one very large medical device manufacturer that did a survey of how many of their field, how many of the devices in the field actually got a malware on it. The number was amazing. It's more than 95% of your X-ray machines and ultrasound machines and so forth, and drug infusion equipment and so forth that has a malware on it. And if you think about it, it's actually not surprising. Most of these devices are old operating systems, right? You know, they've been, the technicians are misusing them. Patching them is a nightmare from an FDA support. So it's actually not surprising that I would guess that 100% would have malware on it. But this is a huge issue. And you're right that cybercrime and medical records is huge, but I think that the industry would wake up only after a cyber terrorism would happen in that respect, because this will be a much bigger impact in terms
it's
of...
It's a huge opportunity for Israel.
Absolutely.
For Israeli technology, because Israel is very strong beside medicine and medical innovation and digital health and etc. and cybersecurity. And we host here many delegations of HMOs, large hospital chains, and even pharma and medical device company. Half of their time in Israel they spend looking for medical technologies, and half of their time they spend with cybersecurity companies. It's really, in the last year or two, that's what they're doing. They're coming to Israel to look for cybersecurity.
Yep. Galit,
It's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, so Galit, I wanted to ask you about something that Yoav said, which might be kind of a sensitive point for companies like yours, which is that, you know, companies that engage in bleeding edge technology with a 20-year cycle, development cycle, might be, I don't know if not attractive, but not suited for the business model of the VC industry. So I wanted to ask you about, you know, your experience as an entrepreneur trying to, you know, run and fund a company going for the, you know, a marathon.
So it's always longer than you anticipate. What is interesting that for coming with an idea and then having, like after a year, you could have the feasibility, you could have clinical trials showing that it's working. But then come all the process of, we just touched on one element of that, of validation, of regulation, of market education. You know, the word was spinning before you came, and then you need to change your word. So it doesn't take, it's not a one-day work. So actually, when you're coming with a new idea, the work on the new idea and the concept is taking only partial time for your whole process of a company. And then you need to calculate that, and then you need to be unique and creative in how to make it work, still work, how to fund it. It's longer than at the beginning. You need to take a long breath, and you need to be, and this is something in Israel very good, you need to be very efficient, cost efficient, very lean, in order to get to the point when you are, okay, you have a technology, you are starting commercialization, and then the investors or the VCs seeing the 2, 3, or 4 years of when they could get their exit or can see the commercialization or in interest in revenues or M&A, whatever it is. So actually there is a long process before you reach to the point where VCs or investor or corporate are actually getting into this product, and this is where many companies, Israeli companies, are struggling, innovative in that way, not only from the technology side, but also from the business side.
And if you're lucky along that path, at the end of the day, what you're doing is to sell your IP to a big company, okay? But that's not the path.
We are here for that.
No, you're here for that, but that's not the path to build an industry in a nation, right? That's not the path, not in our opinion. We think that we need to create large companies in Israel. We need more Teva-like companies. And that's something that the existing financing industry for startup is actually not equipped to do, right? We don't have those later stage where you have to invest at least 20x the amount of R&D in marketing and sales and of that product. We're not equipped to do that. And this is why we believe that if we want to create a sustainable ecosystem here in medical and pharma, you need to hedge some of those bleeding edge companies that takes 10, 15 years, by the way, which is longer than the life cycle of a fund, to create. You actually need to create those quicker, innovative steps on top of existing infrastructure that can reach the market in 2 or 3 years, reach significant revenues, and then you can have a decision point at least of whether or not you want to sell the IP or to build large companies. In that bleeding edge kind of tip, at the end of the day, what happens is that you have no other option but to sell the IP.
Guido, the issue is that, first of all, we don't have so many global companies in high tech. And you mentioned the long development time in medical device or life sciences, but what is different, in life sciences or any product or any new product in life science, you have to actually demonstrate value. And to demonstrate value in life science products, it takes much longer. Value in life sciences is not just better clinical outcome, it has to be in a cost-effective way, and it takes long time with clinical trials. It's not an app or a new social network. So it's a long cycle, and I'm not sure that we'll have many Tevas here in Israel. We don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the manpower, we don't have the funding, but that's not...
Yeah, but Benny, let me comment on that, because I think, Galit, you have to compliment her on what she's done, because the funding cycles have completely changed. I've been doing this for 25 years, and it's not just VCs anymore.
Yeah.
We have a fund, Michael Gava has a fund, Triventures, that's made up of all, life science LPs. So we get more educated. Now, Galit, she has a strategic in her to help her. Philips has been incredible at the earlier stages than they ever have been before. Not only at guidance, not just capital, but guidance as to maybe potentially decrease that cycle time, because we get maturity and thoughts of how to build a business earlier. And I think that's probably one of your maneuvers too, and you should be complimented for that.
There is no shortage in Israel funding startups and early stage and mid-stage life science company. It's in the last 2 years the highest. $900 million were invested in 2015 just in life science companies. Most of it not but Israeli fund or
What I'm
corporate.
talking about is
But
people that actually can help the process.
To create a global company, that's a completely different story.
But I think I wanted to, so Guido, you represent, the large multinational which might, come in and, buy the IP of the poor startup. So would you agree with this characterization that, the big companies might be, not helping, as someone who's a veteran of the Israeli industry and represents a multinational, so do they help or impede the development of a local industry?
I am not a native English speaker, so I can only say one word: bullshit. And now I want to justify that. First of all, you don't know me, but I believe I have enough credibility in the Israeli industry. I am working 35 years, 20 years with Elsint, which I believe was a recognized flagship of the Israeli industry. Then they have the privilege, and they consider it a privilege and an honor, to shift and grow Elsint from a small startup to a large industry located in the north of Israel. I received a group of 150 employees when Elsint exploded. Today we are more than 1,000. There is an economical benefit, to the state of Israel. By the way, I was mentioning that to you. Sometimes people are asking, Guido, are you more Israeli or more Philips? And they leave to you the answer. And now I come into the point. The economical benefit of a company employing 1,000 employees in high-tech is a large benefit for the state of Israel. Generally, we use in high-tech the number 5. For each high-tech employee, there are 5 people supporting, so we are already 5,000 families. So this is one economical aspect. But now I look for the non-economical aspect. Let's remember, I have a lot of respect for startups. I came from the startup world because Elsint was just a startup. But multinationals like GE, like Johnson & Johnson with Biosense, like others, not only Philips, they bring the large picture. You come with a small innovative something, But this something is an element of a large care cycle. And these large multinationals, they understand what is this large something. Second, let's also remember that, and you mentioned it, we know, when I was in Helsinki, I thought that R&D spending was actually, wow. In Philips, we spend 1.9 billion euro a year in R&D, okay? So money is available. But I also understand that developing a channel, educating customer is the big challenge. For a large company, the shops are already there. So my innovation that is done by these 1,000 employees and by this additional now Sanara Ventures with Teva. So we have also a technological incubator. We are investing in startups, but we know how to bring them then over the big chasm of debt. This is where money is not available sometimes. You have a prototype and then you lose everything. So from that point of view, let's also remember, you want a large-scale success? Yes, we want large company. We don't know, I'm Israeli, okay? We don't know what is designed for cost, designed for manufacturability. But this is what they are expecting. The consumer is expecting reliable products, consumer products. So my answer is, I wish to design industry a lot of Philips, a lot of Intel, a lot of multinationals.
I think that there is no disagreeing on the role of multinational corporations and their importance in the ecosystem. That was not the point. The point was that in order to really create an ecosystem, okay, and there's no disputing the fact that for an individual entrepreneur selling a company to Philips or to Teva or to anyone else is a great outcome, and for their investor, right? And that's maybe the only way to productize and commercialize IP on the bleeding edge. The point was that in order to create a sustainable industry, and I'm talking now about nationwide, not necessarily about an individual startup or an individual investment. I mean, we had 29 notable exits, 17 out of which have been M&A, the other ones have been IPOs. So definitely M&A is the main path for exit for investors. But I think the challenge for Israel as a nation, right, is to create sustainable, self-sufficient, heterogeneous kind of ecosystem, right? We need larger life sciences, medical companies to operate here for a long period of time. We cannot rely just on the multinationals, and it's enough to look at what is happening now at Intel, what has happened and happening in Qualcomm, for example, on the other side of the house, which is dramatically going to impact the high-tech industry.
It is less than 10% in reduction worldwide and also in Israel. So again, I'm not here to protect multinationals, but I believe that the dream of having Helsinki was my dream, and today I'm proud to say we brought the vision to execution.
Before we wrap up, I think maybe we can take a couple of questions from the audience. Yeah, over there.
Yes, I would like to bring the perspective of a physician. We have used this. I'm a physician, but I'm also an informatics and ergonomics guy. And so I'm listening to you, and from experience that I have in the defense world, I want to ask you, are you looking into basically the human side of it and the user side? I worked for the U.S. government for many years, and we developed all these defense, amazing transformation defense stuff that soldiers can't do. It's amazing stuff. We spent billions of them. But then we started looking at how the soldier in the field is going to use it. And now we realize we need to build a whole new, which now we're 10 years later, we've already done that. Who's talking about medical schools, family physicians, which is my trap? That's a revolution what we're talking about here, an absolute revolution that I love, that I support, that I'm very excited about. I'm just worried that the human element is the critical element, the bottleneck, if you ask me. I don't know who's talking about this. The second point I want to bring up, not really related, in the end, all of this has to go through FDA. From experience with the FDA, there are dear people, but so human aspect.
So I can take the first one since we share a common background. You can't take the physician out of this. You always have to keep that as part of this accelerant. And these are accelerants in some ways. And like what was spoken before, the invention, the innovation, that's the easy part. It's the execution that everybody gets messed up on. And how to integrate into the pathways that these folks are experts at so that it is manufacturable. It does have a regulatory path to it, and it is something that you can use efficiently. So that part always has to be kept there. But I think there are tools that are becoming available that are actually going to make your job easier. And that's the part that we're talking about. From a regulatory perspective, I've been on the FDA panel for 20 years. It's unpredictability that gets you. In the last 3 to 5 years, especially since they've had some big changes, they're much more predictable, both on the drug side and the device side in the last 3 years. Now, whether that maintains itself through some of our political storms going forward, I don't know. But the head of the FDA now is a guy who really knows how to do things, and I think that's important.
I would like to add that, to what Peter said is, first of all, it has to go into your workflow. I'm a physician as well, and it doesn't change your workflow dramatically because that's the way you practice and do things. The user interface is as much important as to you as it to the consumer as well. And we have to adapt the technology to the older consumer who's going to use it and to the younger millennium consumer. So consumer interface or interface is very, very important in easiness of use.
All right, I think we'll conclude with that. I wanted to thank all of you for a fascinating conversation. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to all our panelists. It was really a very interesting panel. I also would like to say, because it is true that we have all these panels in the other room, that people are there also to wait for Kissinger's speech, that all the speeches and all the panel will be also on the website of IDC and on the website of Connecting Leaders. So I think it's really great because we'll be able also to share all this panel, which was really fascinating with all the others. And we also encourage you, by the way, just like to also take this video and to show it everywhere because it was really very interesting. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much. And I'll suggest that we all join now to the other session to listen to Henry Kissinger. As if I can say, I really think that leadership is not a question of age and that modernity is before all a question of mind. And this is what we are going to attend now. Thank you very much.